Esther Williams was the kind of woman who made people look twice and then look again, not because she tried, but because she simply was. 23 years old, deep ebony skin that caught light like it had an agreement with it. High cheekbones that her mother said came from their grandmother in Calabar. Full lips that smiled before they spoke, and eyes so direct and bright that people sometimes forgot what they were saying mid-sentence when she looked at them. She was not from wealth. She was from something better, a family that understood beauty, understood fabric, understood the language of color the way other people understood breathing. She had grown up watching her mother sew, not as a hobby, not as a side income, but as a religion. Her mother treated every piece of fabric like it had a soul that needed to be respected and released properly. She taught Esther that Nigerian fabric was not just material. It was memory. It was geography. It was identity stitched in a thread. Ankara, Asawake, Andire, George. Each one a conversation. Each one a statement that said we are here, and we are not small. Esther opened her label, Williams Stitch, at 21 with 200,000 naira. She had saved from 3 years of making pieces for women in her neighborhood in Lekki, Lagos. The name was simple because she believed simple things carried the most weight. By 22, she had a small studio, 2 assistants, and a reputation that had begun to travel further than she had planned. A Nollywood actress wore one of her pieces to a premiere. A photo circulated. The caption said the designer's name. Her phone did not stop for 4 days. By 23, she had an invitation to present at Seoul Fashion Week. She read the email 3 times before she called her mother. The invitation came through a cultural exchange initiative between Nigerian and Korean creative industries. 3 Nigerian designers had been selected. Esther was the youngest. The program coordinator, a warm Nigerian woman in her 40s named Mrs. Adeyemi, had called her personally to explain the terms. 5 days in Seoul, a 15-minute runway slot, accommodation and flights covered, the opportunity to pitch to Korean retail buyers and potential distribution partners. Esther sat in her studio the night before the flight and looked at the collection she had spent 4 months building. 12 pieces. Each one told a part of the same story, the story of Nigerian women across generations. The first piece was inspired by her grandmother. The last piece was inspired by herself. The collection was called Roots and Routes. Roots for where she came from, routes for where she was going. Her assistant Blessing stood in the doorway, watching her look at the pieces. "You are going to walk into Seoul and show them something they have never seen," Blessing said. Or, "I'm going to walk into Seoul and embarrass myself in front of people who have seen everything," Esther said. "Same thing," Blessing said. "Just depends on how you carry it." Esther laughed. She packed the collection carefully. She did not sleep much. She got on the plane the next morning with her garment bags in the overhead compartment and her portfolio on her lap, and her grandmother's voice in her head, saying the same thing it always said. "You are not made of salt. You will not dissolve." Jae-Won had not wanted to attend Seoul Fashion Week. He attended it every year because KJW Holdings had a hospitality suite and clients to entertain and appearances that needed to be made. He sat through the shows in the same way. He sat through many things that were required of him. Present, composed, already thinking about the next thing on the agenda. Fashion did not move him. Beautiful things in general did not move him, or had not for long enough that he had stopped noticing the absence. He was 32. He had built his father's mid-sized import company into a holdings group with interest across 6 countries. He worked 16 hours on most days because the alternative was going home to a penthouse apartment that was architecturally perfect and felt like nobody lived in it. His mother had been trying to solve what she called his emotional unavailability for 3 years through the introduction of suitable women. Each introduction produced the same result: a pleasant dinner and a polite follow-up call, and nothing. His assistant Min Jun had once said quietly that the problem was not the women. The problem was that Jae-Won had not yet met anyone who was more interesting than his work. Jae-Won had not responded to that observation, but he had not forgotten it either. He arrived at Seoul Fashion Week on the second day in a dark suit, shook 6 hands in the first 10 minutes, accepted a glass of something sparkling he did not intend to drink, and sat in his designated seat 3 rows from the runway, with the expression of a man honoring an obligation. The first two shows came and went. The third show was announced as part of the cultural exchange program. The host said the designer was from Lagos, Nigeria, 23 years old. First international showing. Jae-Won looked at his phone. The lights changed. The music changed. Something entirely different came out of the speakers. Not the usual Fashion Week electronic composition, but something that started deep, started in a drum, started in a place that had roots in it. The first model walked out, and the room shifted. The fabric was unlike anything on that runway. It was alive in a way the other collections were not. Color that did not apologize. Pattern that told something. Structure that came from a completely different vocabulary of beauty. Jae-Won looked up from his phone. Then Esther Williams walked out. She was not supposed to walk the runway. The designer walking with the final piece was not on the program. But when the last model appeared in the final piece, the one inspired by Esther herself, the most personal piece in the collection, Esther walked out beside her. She wore a simple version of the same design. No shoes. Her natural hair. Minimal jewelry. The Yuli-inspired pattern along her collarbone catching the stage light. She walked to the end of the runway with the certainty of someone who had made peace with being exactly who she was. She reached the end of the runway and stopped. She looked out at the audience with those direct, bright eyes. Not performing confidence. Simply having it. Jae-Won forgot he was holding a glass. The room erupted. Not politely, genuinely. The applause had texture to it. Several people stood. Esther stood at the end of that runway and received it without collapsing under it or inflating with it. She received it the way someone receives rain they were not surprised by. Then she turned and walked back. Jae-Won sat very still for a moment. Min-Jun leaned over and said something. He did not hear what it was. The reception afterward was in the hotel ballroom adjacent to the venue. Esther was surrounded within minutes. Buyers, journalists, other designers, the program coordinator pulling her from conversation to conversation. She navigated it with the same quality. She navigated everything. Present, warm, unhurried, and fundamentally herself. She spoke about the collection with a clarity that stopped people mid-drink. She knew exactly what she had made and why she had made it, and she was not going to reduce it for anyone's comfort. Jae-Won appeared in her orbit 40 minutes into the reception. It was not entirely accidental. He had found Min-Jun and told him he wanted an introduction to the Nigerian designer, and Min-Jun had done what Min-Jun always did, which was produce the thing required with minimal fuss. But by the time they crossed the room, she had moved, and Jae-Won found himself standing beside her at the drinks table without an introduction, both of them reaching for water at the same moment. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Your collection," he said, and then stopped because what came after was not a sentence he had prepared. Esther raised an eyebrow slightly. She was used to people beginning sentences about her work and not finishing them. "Yes," she said. "It was the most interesting thing in the room," he said. "In this room and the room before." She looked at him for a moment, assessing. He was not performing a compliment. He was reporting an observation. She could tell the difference. "Thank you," she said. "You are not a fashion person." He blinked. "How do you know?" "You said interesting. Fashion people say stunning, extraordinary, visceral, transcendent. Interesting is what someone says when they mean it." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. The muscle memory of one. "Kim Jae-Won," he said and held out his hand. "Esther Williams," she said and shook it. His hand was cool and dry, and she dropped it at the appropriate moment and did not think about it afterward, or tried not to. They spoke for 20 minutes at the drinks table. 20 minutes at an industry reception was a significant allocation of time, and both of them knew it, and neither moved away. He asked her about the collection with the specific curiosity of someone who actually wanted to understand something, not perform interest. She answered him the way she answered everyone, directly, with no reduction. She told him about her mother's sewing, about Nigerian fabric as memory, about what she was trying to say with roots and routes. He listened the way she would think about later in her hotel room, when she was being honest with herself. He listened like the words were going somewhere in him, not just passing through. "You walked out with the final piece," he said. "Yes." "That was not on the program." "No. Why did you do it?" She looked at him. Because the last piece was about me, and I felt like I should be the one to carry it out. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That was the right decision." She tilted her head. "You say that like a business assessment. I say it like the truth." She almost smiled. Before she could respond, Mrs. Adeyemi appeared and pulled her toward a buyer who needed an introduction. Esther went. She glanced back once. He was still standing at the drinks table, watching her go. He did not look away when she caught him looking. She looked away first. She saw him again the next morning. The program had arranged a cultural exchange breakfast for the participating designers and their Korean industry counterparts. Jae-Won was not supposed to be there. His company was a holding group, not a fashion house. But Min-jun had made a call, and a seat had appeared, and there he was across the long breakfast table when she walked in. She sat down. She looked at him across the table. "You are not a fashion person," she said again, by way of greeting. "No," he agreed. "But I am here." "Why?" He poured tea in his cup. "I have a question about your distribution model." She stared at him. "You came to a designer breakfast to ask about my distribution model." "Yes." "That is either very strange or very direct." "Both," he said pleasantly. She sat down properly, and they talked for an hour. Not just about distribution, about everything the collection was meant to do, about the gap in the market for African luxury fashion in East Asia, about the specific problem of African designers losing control of their aesthetic when they went international, about what she was building and how she intended to build it. He asked intelligent questions. She gave intelligent answers. By the end of the breakfast, she had a business card in her hand, and a feeling in her chest she was choosing not to examine. The rain came on day 3. Seoul in that season could turn without warning. 1 hour it was clear, and the next the city was gray and wet, and the streets emptied of everyone who had somewhere to be. Esther was between appointments, walking from the venue back toward the hotel when it started. She had no umbrella. She had not checked the weather because she was from Lagos, and in Lagos you carried an umbrella always, or you accepted that you might get wet, and she had accepted this a long time ago. She stopped under an awning for exactly 30 seconds. She looked at the rain coming down on the Seoul street, the gray buildings, the neon signs blurred through the water, the empty pavement, and the way the rain made everything clean and immediate and present. Then she did what her grandmother had taught her to do. She stepped out of the awning and into the rain. She was not dancing the way she would have danced at home. Seoul was not Calabar, but the spirit of it was the same, the tilting back of the head, the arms opening slightly, the letting of the rain be what it was, the refusal to run from the water. She stood in the Seoul rain with her eyes closed and her face up, and for a moment she was not a designer in International Fashion Week managing impressions and building a career. She was just herself, the girl her grandmother raised, the girl made of something that did not dissolve. She heard footsteps stop behind her. She opened her eyes and turned. Jae-Won stood at the edge of the awning she had just left. He had an umbrella that he had not opened. He was looking at her standing in the rain with an expression she had not seen on his face before. All the composure was still there, but underneath it something had cracked open, and the thing underneath was not composed at all. It was the expression of a man seeing something he had not known he was looking for. They looked at each other. Rain between them. "You are getting very wet," he said. "I know," she said. "It is raining quite heavily." "I can see that." He looked at her for another moment. Then he closed the umbrella he had not opened, stepped out from under the awning, and stood in the rain beside her. She turned her face back up to the sky. He stood next to her. Neither of them moved. The Seoul rain came down on both of them, on her deep ebony skin and his fair Korean complexion, on her natural hair and his perfectly cut black hair, and the city moved around them without caring at all. "My grandmother taught me this," she said without looking at him. She said, "You are not made of salt." "You won't dissolve," he said quietly. She looked at him then, surprised. He was looking straight up at the rain. "Yes," she said. "How did you know?" "I didn't," he said. It just seemed like the right ending to that sentence. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at her. Rain on his face, on his suit, his umbrella hanging useless from his hand. Then she laughed, full and real and unashamed, the way she always laughed, and the sound of it rose up into the Seoul rain and went somewhere he was going to keep hearing it for a very long time. They had dinner that night, not arranged by anyone. He texted the number on the business card she had not yet saved and said he knew a place that was quiet and had good food, and she said what time, and he said 8, and she said fine. The restaurant was small and Korean, and the owner knew him by name. They sat by a window with rain still streaking down the glass. She had changed into a green Ankara dress from her personal collection, and she looked like a deliberate choice in a room full of accidents. He had changed from the wet suit into something simpler. He looked less corporate, more like a person. They talked for 3 hours. About everything. About Lagos and Seoul, and the specific loneliness of building something from nothing without the cushion of family money. About what it felt like to walk into rooms where no one expected you to have the answer and have it anyway. About the moment you realize you have outgrown something, a place, a version of yourself, a way of being small because smallness felt safer. She told him about her mother's hands on fabric. He told her about his father's company, one small office in Mapo-gu, and how he had taken it and built it into something his father would not have been able to imagine. She heard the love and the weight in that story. She did not make it simple by saying the easy thing. She sat with it. "You carry a lot," she said. "So do you," he said. "I was raised to carry things well." "So was I," he said, "but I was not raised to enjoy them." She looked at him across the table. "Do you enjoy things?" He was quiet for a moment. "Tonight," he said, "yes." The simplicity of it landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. She looked at the rain on the window. He looked at her looking at the rain. The restaurant emptied slowly around them, and they were the last people there, and neither of them noticed until the owner came and smiled and said he was not rushing them, but perhaps they wanted dessert. She had 2 days left in Seoul. They spent most of them in each other's company. Not romantically, or not yet, not named yet, not agreed upon, but continuously. He showed her Seoul the way someone shows a place to a person they want to keep in the city. She showed him her process, the portfolio reviews, the buyer meetings she let him sit in on, watching him watch her work with that particular quiet attention of his. She introduced him to her collection properly, piece by piece. He asked about each one. He did not pretend expertise he did not have. He asked like someone learning a language. "What does this pattern mean? Where does this cut come from? Why this color with this fabric?" She answered each question with the specificity it deserved, and somewhere in those answers, she was saying things she had not said to anyone who was not already from her world. He received them without making them smaller. She stood beside piece 7, the one her mother had directly inspired. Her hands were in her pockets. She told him about the morning she had finished it and called her mother and described it over the phone, and her mother had cried before she had seen it. Her voice was steady telling it, but her eyes were doing something she couldn't control. He said nothing. He did not reach for comfort words the way people reach for comfort words when they did not know what else to do. He just stood beside her and looked at the piece and let the story be exactly as heavy as it was. She appreciated that more than anything he could have said. On her last evening, his mother called. Esther was not there for the call. She found out about it afterward, slowly, in pieces. The mother's name was Kim Young-suk, and she was a formidable woman who had been managing her son's personal life with the same efficiency she had once managed household accounts. She had heard through channels that her son had spent several days in the company of a foreign designer. She called to ask pointed questions in the way that was not asking, but telling. Jae-Won came back from the call quieter than usual. They were in the hotel lobby, and she noticed the change immediately. He sat down in the chair across from her, and his face had shifted back toward the boardroom face, the closed one, and she felt something in her chest go carefully still. "Your mother," she said. He looked at her. "Yes. She is concerned. She is always concerned. About me specifically." He did not answer immediately, and that answer was its own answer. She looked at him steadily. She was not a woman who fell apart in lobbies or anywhere else. But she was also not a woman who would pretend she had not just understood something clearly. "I see," she said. "Esther, you do not need to explain it," she said calmly. "I understand how these things work. Families have structures, expectations. I am not from your world in the ways that matter to people like your mother. I understand that. You don't know what I was going to say. Tell me then." He looked at her. His jaw was tight. "I was going to say that she does not speak for me." The silence that followed was long. Esther held his gaze. She was looking for something, not reassurance. She did not need reassurance. She was looking for truth. She could always tell the difference. Then were you saying? She asked quietly. I'm saying I've spent the last 4 days with someone who has made me feel more awake than I have felt in years, and I do not want to perform any version of cool indifference about that. Her lips parted slightly. She had not prepared for him to be that direct. She collected herself. She looked at her hands for a moment, and then back at him. I fly home tomorrow morning, she said. I know. Lagos is not Seoul. I know that too. What are you suggesting? He leaned forward. I am suggesting that we do not end this because a lobby and a flight schedule say it should end. She looked at him for a long time. Outside the hotel, the Seoul night was wet and glowing, and the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way. She thought about her mother, about William Stitch, about the collection folded in its garment bags upstairs, about everything she had built with her own hands, about the specific danger of letting someone into the structure of your life when you are still building its walls. She thought about the rain. She thought about stepping out of the awning. You are not made of salt. You will not dissolve. I have a business to run, she said. So do I. I'm not interested in being anyone's international romance, she said. I'm not a story a man tells when he gets back to his real life. I know, he said. You made that clear on the runway the first time I saw you. She almost smiled. She did not. Don't flatter me. I am reporting an observation. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she said, my flight is at 7. If you want to continue this conversation, it will have to be continued across a significant geographical distance. I have a phone, he said. You are also a CEO of a holdings group, she said. You have assets in 6 countries. Nigeria is not one of them, he said. No, she said. It is not. The look that passed between them in that hotel lobby said the rest of what needed to be said without either of them saying it. She flew home the next morning. He drove her to the airport himself. Inu Minyun. No driver. He drove, and she sat in the passenger seat with her garment bags in the back and her portfolio on her lap, and Seoul going past the windows for the last time. They did not talk much. The silence was comfortable in the way only silences between people who have talked about real things can be. At the departure gate, he stood with her for a moment. The airport moved around them. He looked at her with those dark eyes, and she looked back at him with everything she was, and neither of them performed anything. You are not made of salt, he said. She felt that in her whole body. She lifted her chin. No, she said. I am not. He stepped forward and held her for exactly long enough. Her face against his shoulder, his arms around her. Then she picked up her bags and walked through departures and did not look back, because she knew if she looked back she would stand there longer than she could afford to. He watched her until she disappeared. Then he stood in the airport for another 5 minutes doing nothing at all. She was home for 2 weeks when the knock came. Not literally. He was not on her doorstep. He was better than that. He flew to Lagos with no business agenda and no pretense of one, and called her from outside the arrivals hall and said, I told you I had a phone. I decided the phone was not enough. She stood in her studio holding the phone. Blessing was watching from the cutting table with an expression of barely contained excitement. Esther turned away from Blessing and said, You flew to Lagos? Yes. For no business reason. Correct. That is impractical. I know. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she said, I will send you the address. He came to the studio. He walked in with that composure and those sharp Korean features in his dark eyes, and he looked around at the fabric and the sketches and the garment rails and the half-made pieces and the organized, beautiful chaos of the place she had built, and he looked at it the way he had looked at her collection in Seoul, like something he wanted to understand properly from the inside. This is impressive, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Blessing made a sound that was theoretically a cough. Esther said, Blessing, go to the stockroom. Blessing went to the stockroom and stood exactly inside it with her ear near the door. He stayed in Lagos for 5 days. He came to the studio every morning. He watched Esther work with the same quality of attention he had shown in Seoul. He brought himself, not a performance of himself, not the CEO version or the well-managed version, just the man. In the evenings, they went to places she loved in Lagos, a small restaurant in Surulere where the buka food was serious, A beach in the early evening where the light did something extraordinary to the water. A fabric market in Balagan where she moved through the stalls like she was visiting friends, and he followed and touched anchor bolts with careful fingers, and she showed him what to feel for in good fabric. "Feel the weight," she said, her hand over his, pressing his palm flat against the fabric. "Good fabric has density. It wants to fall a certain way. You can feel it deciding." He pressed his hand flat against the fabric. He felt it. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I feel it." She looked at their hands on the fabric. Then she looked up at him. They were standing very close in the market, and she said, Don't what? Look at me like that in Balagan Market. These traders will have us engaged before we leave this row." He laughed. An actual laugh. The market women in the surrounding stalls looked at the Korean man laughing and smiled at each other with the knowing looks of women who understand exactly what is happening in front of them. His mother came to Lagos 3 months later. It was not a surprise visit this time. Jae-Won had spoken to his mother with the kind of directness that had initially produced what Min Jun described as a very cold 2-week period of communication. But Jae-Won did not change his position, and his mother, who was a sharp woman underneath all her management of things, watched her son across video calls and saw something she had not seen in him since he was a young man who still believed in things. She arranged a visit. She said she wanted to see Lagos, and she wanted to meet Esther properly. Esther prepared for the meeting the way she prepared for everything that mattered. She was completely herself. She wore one of her own designs. She welcomed the older woman to her studio personally. She did not reduce herself, and she did not perform warmth she did not feel. She offered real warmth and let it be what it was. Kim Young-suk walked around the studio with those sharp assessing eyes and looked at the collection and asked questions through her son, who translated. The questions were good questions. Esther answered them honestly. At one point, the older woman picked up a fabric swatch, an ankara piece in deep purple and gold, and held it to the light and said something in Korean. Jae-Won translated. She says the color reminds her of something she cannot name. Esther looked at the older woman. "Tell her that is the point," she said. "The best fabric makes you feel something that existed before the word for it." Young-suk listened to the translation. She looked at Esther for a long moment. Then she nodded, a specific nod, the nod of a woman revising something she thought she had already decided. The night it finally rained in Lagos the way Lagos rain could rain, not politely, not gradually, but all at once and completely. Esther and Jae-Won were on the studio rooftop where she sometimes came to think. The rain arrived without warning. They both got immediately soaked. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was already tilting her face up. "Don't you dare," he said. She spread her arms. "Esther." She began to move. Not the full dance, just the spirit of it. The opening, the refusal to run. The Lagos rain on her deep ebony skin. Her ankara dress soaked through. Her natural hair wet. Completely present. Completely herself. He stood in the rain watching her, and then he did what he had decided somewhere between Seoul and Lagos and Balagan Market, and 3 months of phone calls and 5 days of watching her work. He walked forward into the rain, and he put his hands on her face, and she stopped moving and looked at him, water running down both their faces. "I'm not going back," he said. I'm going back to Seoul, but I'm coming back here. I want to keep coming back here. I want to be where you are." She looked at him. The Lagos rain was serious and committed, and had soaked everything completely. "That is impractical," she said. "I know. I'm not moving to Seoul," she said. "My business is here. My mother is here." "I'm not asking you to move," he said. "I'm saying I will move." She blinked, water on her lashes. "You will move. We're split. Seoul and Lagos. I have done harder things." She stared at him for a long moment. The rain continued without caring about any of this. Jae-Won. "Esther, this is very dramatic," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "We are standing in rain, having a declaration." "Yes. I am a 23-year-old Lagos fashion designer." "I know exactly who you are," he said. "That is the point." She looked at him for the last long moment of holding back. Then she laughed, full and real, and from the bottom of everything. And she stepped forward, and that was the end of the last distance between them. The Lagos rain came down on both of them, and the city moved below the rooftop, And in the studio, Blessing, who had been working late, heard the rain and then heard laughing and decided wisely to stay exactly where she was. Williams' stitch showed at Seoul Fashion Week for the second consecutive year, 6 months later. The collection was called Between. It was about two things becoming one thing without either of them disappearing. The final piece was the most extraordinary thing in the room. Esther walked it out herself again, bare feet, natural hair, Uli-inspired pattern at her collarbone. She reached the end of the runway. She looked out at the audience. 3 rows from the runway, a Korean man in a dark suit was not looking at his phone. He was looking at her with those dark eyes, and she looked back at him with the full weight of everything she was. And in the room full of people performing things they were not sure they felt, 2 people felt exactly what they were feeling and did not perform anything at all. She turned. She walked back. He stood up and clapped and did not care who saw. If this story held you from beginning to end, if Esther and Jae-Won made you feel something real, please tap that like button right now and let us know. Subscribe to AfroKDrama because we are telling stories that cross oceans, carry culture, and refuse to be small. Drop a comment and tell us, what was your favorite moment? Was it the rain in Seoul, the rain in Lagos, or the runway? We read every single comment, and we will see you in the next one.